I dragged myself through the front door, barely able to stand after undergoing major organ donation surgery. Before I could even drop my keys, my sister shouted from the living room, demanding to know why I was only just getting home. She told me to stop faking my pain and go make dinner. She had no idea that the billionaire CEO of her husband's company was standing right on my front porch, watching her every move. I am Camille, 35 years old, and a senior forensic accountant who spent my entire life being the financial backbone for a family that never respected me. I had just anonymously donated a kidney to a child returning to my own four-bedroom Atlanta home, only to be treated like the hired help. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who felt entitled to your hard work. Growing up, I learned early that my younger sister Jada was the golden child. While I spent my nights studying to secure a full academic scholarship, Jada was handed everything on a silver platter. I bought my beautiful Atlanta home through sheer grit and late nights crunching numbers. It was meant to be my sanctuary. Instead, it became a hotel for Jada and her arrogant white husband Trent. Trent worked in middle management at a massive corporate firm and constantly belittled my career, oblivious to the fact that his entire lifestyle was subsidized by my bank accounts. The sweltering Atlanta heat was suffocating as I stepped out of the private car that afternoon. Every single movement sent a sharp, agonizing wave of pain radiating from my abdomen. The thick surgical bandages tightly wrapped around my waist felt heavy beneath my trench coat. I had spent the last week in a sterile hospital room recovering from the kidney extraction. It was a major life-altering procedure, but I kept the details vague when I texted my family. I simply told them I was having an invasive medical procedure and needed a quiet house to recover in. I should have known better than to expect basic human decency. I pushed the heavy oak front door open, my hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. I had barely crossed the threshold into my own foyer when the assault began. The house was chaotic. Stacks of expensive floral arrangements covered my custom mahogany dining table. Silver platters and champagne flutes were scattered across the kitchen island. "You are only just home now." Jada stomped into the hallway, her hands planted firmly on her hips. She was wearing a flawless silk dress that I recognized from my own closet, her makeup done to perfection. She glared at me, completely ignoring my pale face and the way I was leaning heavily against the wall for support. "Stop pretending to be weak and go into the kitchen," Jada snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "Trent is getting his vice president promotion tomorrow morning. We are hosting 30 people tonight for a celebratory gourmet dinner, and the caterers canceled at the last minute. You need to start cooking right now." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of her demand. I took a shallow breath, trying to keep my voice steady despite the searing pain in my side. "Jada, I just got out of the hospital. I had major surgery. I cannot stand at a stove, let alone cater a massive party for your husband." Jada rolled her eyes dramatically, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, please, Camille. Do not be so dramatic. Mom told me it was just some elective procedure you scheduled because you wanted attention. You are always trying to steal the spotlight when Trent has something important going on. He is the man of this family, the true provider, and tonight is about honoring his hard work. The least you can do is pull your weight around here since you are single and have nothing else going on." Before I could even formulate a response to her delusion, she grabbed a heavy canvas catering apron off the console table and threw it directly at my chest. The thick fabric hit me hard, brushing against my fresh incisions. I gasped instinctually, wrapping my arms around my stomach to protect myself as the apron fell to the hardwood floor. "Pick it up," Jada demanded, stepping closer and pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You are making beef Wellington, the roasted asparagus Trent likes, and you need to handcraft the crab cake appetizers. And do not think you can hide in your room. If this party is ruined because you are throwing a pity party over some minor procedure, Trent is going to be furious. You know how stressed he gets." The physical pain in my body was suddenly overshadowed by a cold, sharp clarity. For years I had paid their bills, ignored Trent's condescending remarks about my career, and allowed Jada to treat my home like her personal kingdom. They truly believed I was beneath them. They believed my sole purpose was to serve them, to quietly fund their illusions of grandeur while they walked all over me. I looked down at the apron on the floor, then slowly lifted my gaze to meet my sister's eyes. I did not bend down. I did not apologize. I stood up a little straighter, forcing myself to ignore the burning sensation in my side. I realized right then that I was done making excuses for them. I was done shrinking myself to make Trent feel like a big man. "You are out of your mind if you think I am cooking a single meal for that man," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Jada's mouth dropped open in shock. She was not used to me speaking to her with such absolute defiance. Her face turned red with anger and she opened her mouth to scream for our mother. She was ready to escalate the situation, entirely unaware that the foundation of her perfect stolen life was about to crumble beneath her feet. The sharp clack of low heels against my Brazilian cherry hardwood floors cut through the heavy silence in the foyer. My mother Brenda strolled out of the kitchen with an air of absolute authority. She was holding a crystal wine glass filled to the brim with my imported reserve Pinot Noir, a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. She took a slow, deliberate sip, her eyes scanning the scene before finally landing on me. There was no gasp of relief at seeing her eldest daughter home safely from the hospital. There was no motherly rush to check on my condition or ask if I was in pain. Instead, Brenda let out a long, exhausted sigh, as if my pale face and trembling hands were nothing more than a personal inconvenience to her afternoon. "What is all this shouting about?" she asked, her tone dripping with annoyance. "I could hear you two all the way from the patio." Jada immediately snapped out of her shock and fell right into her lifelong role as the victim. "Mom, look at her," Jada whined, pointing at me as if I were a misbehaving child. "Trent is having his promotion dinner in a few hours. The caterer backed out and Camille is refusing to help. She will not even put the apron on. She is trying to ruin Trent's big night on purpose." Brenda walked over to Jada and gently patted her shoulder, a gesture of comfort she had never once offered me. Then she turned her harsh gaze my way. Her eyes dropped to my abdomen, where my trench coat was slightly parted, revealing the thick medical bandaging. Her expression hardened with disgust rather than sympathy. "Pick up the apron, Camille," my mother commanded coldly. "Do not make this difficult. Your sister has been under an immense amount of stress planning this party." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, my chest tightening with a pain that had nothing to do with my surgical incisions. "Mom, I just donated an organ," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I am bleeding through my bandages. I need to lie down, not stand in a hot kitchen and prepare a gourmet feast for 30 strangers." Brenda rolled her eyes, taking another leisurely sip of my expensive wine. "Oh, please. Stop acting like you are a casualty of war. Your surgery was entirely elective and completely dramatic. You chose to give away a kidney to a total stranger. Nobody forced you to do that. And frankly, the timing is incredibly suspicious. You knew Trent was up for this vice president position. You knew this week was crucial for our family. You scheduled this little medical stunt just to steal the spotlight because you cannot stand seeing your sister happy." Every word she spoke was like a physical blow. The absolute delusion in her voice was staggering. I had spent my entire adult life funding this family. I paid off Brenda's car. I covered the property taxes on the house we were standing in. I even paid for Jada's lavish wedding to Trent. Yet in my mother's eyes, I was nothing but a jealous, bitter burden. "You think I went under the knife and had an organ removed from my body just to upstage Trent?" I asked, genuinely horrified by her logic. Brenda took a step closer to me, her face contorting into a mask of bitter resentment. "I think you are 35 years old, single, and deeply unhappy," she sneered. "You have no husband. You have no children. You spend all your time obsessed with your little accounting job. Since you clearly have no real family of your own to take care of your sole purpose, should be supporting the people who do. She gestured grandly toward the living room as if presenting a kingdom. Trent is the man of this house. He goes out into the corporate world every single day and grinds to be a true provider. He is the anchor holding this entire family together. Do you have any idea the pressure he is under? He needs a supportive environment. He needs his home to be a place of peace and celebration. I almost laughed out loud at the profound absurdity of her statement. Trent was not providing for anyone. He was drowning in massive hidden credit card debt that I had discovered months ago while doing a background financial sweep for my firm. The only reason Trent had a roof over his head was because I allowed him to live in my house rent-free. But Brenda did not know that yet, and she was far too busy worshipping the ground her white son-in-law walked on to see the truth. "You are incredibly selfish, Camille," my mother continued, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Jada has built a beautiful life. Trent is giving her everything she deserves. As her older sister, you should be honored to help them celebrate. Instead, you walk in here looking like a ghost, expecting us to drop everything and throw you a pity party. Put the coat away, wash your hands, and get into the kitchen." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Any lingering hope I had that my mother might eventually love me for who I was, rather than what I could buy for her, completely evaporated. She did not see me as a daughter. She saw me as an appliance. A machine designed to generate money and labor so her golden child could live a life of luxury. "I am not cooking," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with an icy finality. "And I am not standing here listening to you praise a man who contributes absolutely nothing to my life. I am going upstairs to my bedroom. If either of you bothers me again, I will call the police and have you both removed from my property." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother lowered her wine glass, her jaw tight with genuine fury. She had never been spoken to like that, especially not by me. She opened her mouth to unleash a tirade of insults, but heavy, arrogant footsteps pounding down the hardwood staircase interrupted her. It was Trent. He had heard the commotion and was coming down to assert his dominance entirely, unaware that the real master of his fate was standing just inches away on the front porch. Trent smoothed the lapels of his tailored navy suit as he reached the bottom of the staircase. He wore a smug expression, his chest puffed out with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he was the center of the universe. He glanced at Jada, who was pouting like a petulant child, and then at my mother, who was still swirling my expensive wine in her glass. Finally, his pale blue eyes locked onto me with absolute disdain. "What is going on down here?" Trent demanded, his voice booming through the foyer. "I am trying to prepare for the most important day of my career, and I can hear you screaming all the way from my home office." Jada immediately rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Camille is trying to ruin your promotion dinner," she whined, pressing her face against his shoulder. "She refuses to put the apron on. She says she is too tired from her little hospital visit to cook for us." Trent gently patted Jada on the back, playing the role of the protective, loving husband to perfection. He slowly unhooked her arms and stepped toward me, closing the distance between us until he was standing completely in my personal space. The overpowering scent of his designer cologne made me want to gag. He looked down at me, his face twisting into a scowl of pure contempt. I kept my posture rigid, ignoring the agonizing throbbing in my abdomen. I calmly looked him dead in the eye and delivered my final answer. "I am not picking up that apron," I said, making sure my words were perfectly clear. "I am going upstairs to rest. If you want a gourmet dinner for your little corporate party, you can order takeout from the Italian restaurant down the street. You have my permission to use the kitchen to plate the food, but I will not be serving anyone tonight." Trent let out a harsh, mocking laugh. He shook his head, looking back at my mother as if to share a joke. "Do you hear this?" he asked Brenda. "She thinks she gives the permissions around here." He turned back to me, his amusement vanishing in an instant. He aggressively jabbed his index finger right in my face, stopping just inches from my nose. You listen to me very carefully, Camille, he spat. You are the most ungrateful, bitter woman I have ever had the misfortune of knowing. I work 60 hours a week at Vanguard Holdings. I grind day in and day out to secure my position as vice president. I provide this beautiful house. I provide this luxurious lifestyle. I tolerate you living under my roof because your sister has a soft heart and begged me to let you stay here. I stared at him in sheer disbelief. The absolute magnitude of his delusion was almost impressive. Trent actually believed his own lies. He had convinced himself and my entire family that his mediocre middle management salary was funding this affluent Atlanta lifestyle. He conveniently forgot that his credit score was completely destroyed. He forgot that every single piece of furniture in this foyer, every appliance in the kitchen, and the very hardwood beneath his polished leather shoes was bought and paid for by my forensic accounting salary. My mother nodded enthusiastically from the background. Tell her, Trent. She needs to hear the truth. Trent puffed his chest out, even further emboldened by Brenda's validation. You are a leech, Camille. You contribute nothing to this family but negativity. Tonight is about my success, and I will not allow your pathetic jealousy to ruin it. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to bend down, pick up that apron, and get into the kitchen right now. I did not move a single muscle. I just watched his face turn red with anger as his intimidation tactics completely failed to break me. When I remained perfectly still, Trent completely lost his temper. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. If you do not pull your weight tonight, you are done. You can pack your bags immediately. If you refuse to support the man of this house, I will kick you out of my home by the end of the week. You will be out on the street, and I will not let Jada or Brenda give you a single dime of my money. The sheer irony of his threat almost made me burst into laughter despite the pain radiating through my surgical wounds. He was threatening to evict me from a house that was legally registered entirely under my name. He was threatening to cut me off from money that I actively deposited into his checking account every month just to keep his massive credit card debts from going into default. I took a deep breath, preparing to drop the absolute truth on him. I was ready to shatter his fragile ego into a million pieces. I opened my mouth to tell him that he was nothing more than a broke, glorified tenant living in my kingdom. But I never got the chance to say it. Before a single word could leave my lips, a cool evening breeze swept through the open front door behind me. The heavy silence in the room was suddenly shattered by a deep, authoritative voice that radiated absolute power and control. You are going to evict the woman who holds the deed to this property. Trent froze. His eyes darted past my shoulder, and the arrogant flush in his cheeks instantly drained, leaving him looking as pale as a ghost. Jada gasped, taking a sudden step backward. Even my mother lowered her wineglass, her jaw dropping open in shock. I did not need to turn around to know who was standing on my porch. The voice belonged to the only man who held more power over Trent than I did. Julian crossed the threshold, his tall frame instantly dominating the entryway. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that made Trent's expensive navy outfit look like cheap polyester. Julian was the billionaire chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings. For the last 3 years, I had been working directly under him as his lead forensic accountant, handling the most sensitive financial audits for his global enterprise. He was a man who commanded absolute respect without ever having to raise his voice. Trent visibly shrank. All the bluster and aggression he had weaponized against me mere seconds ago vanished into thin air. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously, as a sheen of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Jada immediately let go of Trent's arm, her eyes wide as she took in Julian's imposing presence. Even my mother, who usually had something to say about everything, stood frozen by the kitchen island, completely silenced by the aura of pure wealth and authority radiating from the man in my doorway. "Mr. Sterling," Trent stammered, his voice cracking slightly. He quickly cleared his throat desperately, trying to assemble a facade of corporate professionalism. "Sir, I had no idea you were coming. This is an incredible surprise. Please come inside. Trent rushed forward, practically tripping over his own polished shoes, to close the distance between them. He aggressively wiped his sweaty right palm on his suit trousers before extending his hand toward Julian. A frantic, eager smile stretched across his face. He looked like a desperate puppy begging for a scrap from his master's table. I cannot express how honored I am that you came all this way to my home. Trent continued his words, tumbling out in a hurried rush. I know the vice president promotions are being officially announced tomorrow morning, but for the CEO of Vanguard Holdings to personally deliver the news to my residence, well, it is just truly humbling. My wife Jada and I were actually just preparing for my celebratory dinner. You are more than welcome to stay and join us as our guest of honor. I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute train wreck unfold before my eyes. Trent was so consumed by his own monumental ego that he actually believed Julian had driven all the way to Atlanta just to congratulate a mid-level manager on a promotion. He completely ignored the fact that Julian had just questioned his authority to evict me. Trent was entirely blinded by his own greed and ambition. Julian did not say a single word. He stood there like a statue carved from granite. He slowly lowered his gaze to look at Trent's outstretched, trembling hand. The silence in the foyer stretched on, becoming agonizingly heavy. 10 seconds passed. Then 15. Trent's eager smile began to falter, the corners of his mouth twitching as the awkwardness of the rejected handshake filled the room. Julian did not move an inch to reciprocate. He did not offer a polite nod or a forced corporate smile. He looked at Trent's hand with the same level of sheer disgust one might reserve for a piece of garbage left on the sidewalk. Slowly, humiliatingly, Trent pulled his hand back. He awkwardly shoved it deep into his trouser pocket, his face burning a bright, ugly shade of crimson. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, the deafening silence completely breaking his composure. Jada watched her husband's public humiliation with wide, panicked eyes, completely unsure of how to intervene to save his dignity. Brenda stood completely motionless, her wine glass suspended halfway to her mouth. Julian finally shifted his attention away from Trent and looked directly at me. His stern expression instantly softened into a look of genuine professional concern. He took a deliberate step past Trent, completely ignoring his existence, and walked over to where I was leaning against the wall. "Are you all right, Camille?" Julian asked, his deep voice calm and respectful. "My driver told me you insisted on carrying your own overnight bag out of the car. You should not be doing any heavy lifting so soon after your procedure. I told you I would have someone assist you." Trent whipped his head around, his eyes darting between Julian and me in utter bewilderment. His brain was violently short-circuiting. He could not comprehend why the billionaire owner of his company was speaking to his sister-in-law with such profound reverence. He could not understand why Julian knew about my surgery, or why he was standing in my foyer expressing concern for my well-being rather than celebrating his upcoming promotion. "I am fine, Julian," I replied, offering him a small, grateful smile. "But it seems I walked into a bit of a domestic situation." Trent was just explaining the new living arrangements to me. Julian turned slowly on his heel, facing Trent once again. The warmth he had just shown me vanished in an instant, replaced by an expression so cold it could have frozen boiling water. Trent physically took a step backward, his back hitting the console table. He was cornered, completely out of his depth, and finally realizing that his entire carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around him. "Let me get straight to the point," Trent Julian said, his voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. "I am not here to attend a dinner party. I am certainly not here to personally deliver a promotion to a middle management employee. I am here because the most valuable asset Vanguard Holdings possesses was discharged from the hospital today, and I wanted to ensure she arrived home safely." Trent blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked from Julian to me, and then back to Julian. "Sir, I do not understand. Camille is just a bookkeeper. She works in the lower-level accounting division. She does not even report to my floor." Julian let out a short, humorless laugh that made Trent flinch. "A bookkeeper," Julian repeated, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "Trent, your ignorance is truly staggering. Camille does not report to your floor because she reports directly to the executive board. She is my lead forensic accountant. For the last 3 years, she has possessed top-tier security clearance to oversee the financial integrity of our entire global enterprise." Jada gasped loudly, clutching her designer purse against her chest. "That is impossible!" she blurted out, her voice shrill and panicked. "Camille just looks at spreadsheets all day. Trent is the one who secures the big contracts. Trent is the reason your company is succeeding." Julian slowly turned his piercing gaze toward my sister. "I do not know who you are, but you are as deeply misinformed as your husband. Let me make something abundantly clear to everyone in this room. Last month, Vanguard Holdings was targeted for a massive, potentially fatal federal corporate audit. There were severe discrepancies in our regional financial reports, discrepancies that originated directly from Trent's department." Trent let out a strangled gasp, his face suddenly drained of whatever little color it had left. He took another step back, his shoulders hunching, as if he were trying to physically shrink into the wall. If that audit had proceeded without internal correction, Vanguard would have faced millions of dollars in fines. Julian continued, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Hundreds of people would have lost their jobs. The only reason this company is still standing, the only reason Trent still has a paycheck to bring home to you, is because Camille worked 80-hour weeks to untangle the mess. She single-handedly identified the compromised accounts, restructured our regional ledgers, and presented a flawless defense to the federal auditors. Her intellect completely outranks Trent's entire department combined. She is the financial backbone of my company. And from what I can see, she is clearly the financial backbone of this family as well." The silence that followed Julian's declaration was absolute. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. All the lies Trent had fed my family for years were being systematically dismantled by the one man he could never contradict. My mother Brenda finally set her wine glass down on the kitchen island. Her hands were shaking. "Mr. Sterling, I think there has been a massive misunderstanding here," she stammered, frantically trying to salvage the situation. "We respect Camille. We love Camille." Trent was just gently reminding her of her household duties. He is the man of the house after all. He provides the roof over our heads. Julian looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. "Ma'am, I suggest you stop speaking before you embarrass yourself further. I know exactly how much Trent earns. I sign his paychecks. I also know that his salary could not afford the property taxes on a magnificent home like this, let alone the mortgage." Julian then looked directly at Trent, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "So explain to me, Trent, how exactly are you planning to evict the legal homeowner from a property that you do not own? How are you going to kick my lead executive out of a house that she pays for, using money she earns by cleaning up your professional incompetence?" Trent was entirely speechless. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out. He looked at Jada, hoping for backup, but my sister was staring at me as if she were seeing me for the very first time. The illusion of Trent's superiority was completely shattered. He was no longer the successful corporate executive providing a life of luxury. He was a fraud, and Julian had just exposed him in front of the very people he had spent years trying to impress. Trent let out a forced, high-pitched laugh that echoed unnaturally through the quiet foyer. He clapped his hands together desperately, trying to construct a reality where he was still the man in charge. He looked at my mother and then at Jada, his eyes wide and manic, silently begging them to play along with his desperate charade. "He is joking," Trent said, his voice trembling slightly as he forced a massive fake smile onto his pale face. "Mr. Sterling has a legendary sense of humor in the office. It is a corporate inside joke, I assure you. Camille is just a glorified bookkeeper who processes standard expense reports. She has never even been to the executive suite. The audit he is talking about was handled by my department entirely." Jada wanted to believe him. She clung to his words like a life raft, because the alternative meant admitting her entire luxurious existence was funded by the older sister she deeply despised. My mother nodded along enthusiastically, eager to dismiss the billionaire standing in our hallway as an eccentric prankster rather than face the humiliating truth about her golden child's husband. Trent turned his attention back to me, his fake smile dropping the second he made eye contact. The sheer panic in his eyes was quickly being replaced by a volatile defensive rage. His fragile masculine ego was cracking under the immense pressure of Julian's presence. He needed to remove me from the room immediately. He needed to get me away from his boss before any more of his carefully constructed lies were unraveled in front of his wife and mother-in-law. "Come on, Camille Trent," said his tone dripping with a sinister, false familiarity. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are confusing my boss. Let us go into the kitchen right now and get you a glass of water so you can calm down and put that apron on. We have a party to prepare for." He lunged forward, closing the distance between us with aggressive, terrifying speed. He reached out with his large hands, aiming directly for my right arm. His intention was crystal clear. He was going to physically drag me out of the foyer and assert his dominance, treating me like an unruly child rather than the owner of the house. I braced myself, my hand instinctively dropping to protect my fresh surgical incisions from the impending scuffle. But Trent never made contact. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of my trench coat, Julian moved with a speed and precision that caught everyone completely off guard. He stepped squarely between me and Trent, becoming an impenetrable human shield. Julian planted his large hand firmly against the center of Trent's chest and shoved him backward with an immense calculated force. Trent stumbled backward violently, his polished leather shoes losing all traction on the hardwood floor. He flailed his arms wildly to catch his balance, crashing heavily into the entryway console table. A heavy crystal vase wobbled precariously from the impact before tipping over and shattering into dozens of sharp pieces across the floor. "Do not ever attempt to lay your hands on her again," Julian growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous, predatory octave that commanded absolute obedience. "If you so much as breathe in her direction with that kind of aggression, I will personally ensure you never work in corporate America for the rest of your miserable life." Trent pressed his hands against the console table to steady himself, his chest heaving as he stared at Julian in absolute terror. The reality of the situation finally pierced through his thick skull. This was not a joke. This was not a misunderstanding. The chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings had just physically defended me, and he was staring down at Trent with pure, unadulterated fury. Jada let out a piercing shriek. She ran over to Trent, carefully avoiding the broken glass on the floor, and grabbed his arm protectively. "How dare you assault my husband in his own home?" she screamed at Julian, her face contorted in genuine fury. "I am calling the police. You cannot just march in here and put your hands on people." My mother was completely frozen, her jaw hanging slack as she watched the chaotic scene unfold. The pristine, elegant image she had desperately tried to maintain was completely shattered, much like the crystal vase currently decorating my floorboards. She looked from Trent, who was cowering against the table, to Julian, who stood tall and unbothered by Jada's hysterical screaming. Julian slowly adjusted his suit jacket, completely unfazed by the threat of law enforcement. "You do not own this home," he reminded Jada coldly. "And if you would like to call the police, I strongly encourage you to do so. In fact, it might save us all a significant amount of time later this evening." I watched the exchange from behind Julian's broad shoulders, feeling a profound sense of vindication wash over me. The pain radiating from my abdomen was still severe, but the heavy burden of keeping Trent's secrets had finally been lifted. I stepped out from behind Julian, standing tall despite the agony. I was ready to deliver the final blow to their fragile little world, but Jada beat me to it. Driven by pure spite and desperation, she was about to pull out a weapon she thought would destroy me completely. Jada plunged her hand deep into her oversized designer tote bag, her hands shaking with a manic, desperate energy. She was furious that her husband had just been physically humiliated and stripped of his false authority. She needed to regain control of the room, and she was willing to destroy my entire life to do it. She pulled out a thick stack of papers bound in a blue legal folder and marched toward the entryway table. She slammed the heavy document down right next to the shattered pieces of the crystal vase. The sharp thud echoed through the silent foyer, drawing everyone's attention. She turned her venomous glare toward Julian, her chest heaving as she prepared to rewrite the entire narrative. "You are being completely manipulated by her," Jada screamed, pointing a sharp, manicured finger directly at my face. "I do not care what kind of spreadsheet she showed you at work. You do not know the real Camille. She is a compulsive liar. She has spent her entire life trying to destroy my husband's reputation out of pure jealousy." Julian did not flinch at her screaming. He merely raised a single eyebrow, looking at the legal documents on the table with mild curiosity. Jada took his silence as an invitation to continue her unhinged rant. She took a step closer to Julian, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "She is not a genius. She is mentally unstable. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, Mom was granted emergency temporary conservatorship over all her finances." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A cold wave of absolute betrayal washed over me. While I was lying unconscious on an operating table, having a piece of my body removed to save a dying child, my mother and sister were standing in a courtroom. They had used my major medical procedure as a weapon to strip me of my legal and financial autonomy. They had planned this behind my back, waiting for the exact moment I was physically vulnerable to strike. Brenda finally stepped forward, abandoning her spot by the kitchen island. She walked over and placed her hand flat on top of the legal documents, her posture radiating a sickening sense of maternal triumph. She looked at me, not with love, but with the cold calculation of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "It is for your own good, Camille," my mother said, her voice dripping with a fake, overly sweet condescension. "You have been spiraling out of control for months. You bought this massive house that you do not need just to show off. You constantly alienate your own flesh and blood. And then you go and give away a vital organ to a complete stranger. No sane person does that. The judge completely agreed with us. You are a danger to yourself, and you are entirely incapable of managing your own estate." Trent, who had been cowering against the wall just moments ago, suddenly straightened his posture. The color rushed back into his pale face. The realization that my mother now legally controlled my bank accounts acted like a shot of adrenaline to his bruised ego. He adjusted his tie and let out a smug, triumphant chuckle. "Well," Trent said, stepping away from the wall and walking back to Jada's side, "it looks like the situation has changed, Mr. Sterling. Your supposed lead executive is legally classified as incapacitated. She does not own this house anymore. Her conservator does. And her conservator happens to be my mother-in-law, who explicitly gave me permission to run this household and manage its assets." Trent puffed his chest out again, all of his previous terror completely erased by his newfound stolen power. He looked at Julian with an arrogant smirk, clearly believing he had just outsmarted a billionaire. "So I am going to ask you one last time to leave my property. If you do not walk out that front door right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and assault." I stared at the three of them, my own family standing united behind a stack of stolen legal authority. They truly believed they had won. They thought this piece of paper was the ultimate checkmate. They thought they had successfully trapped me in my own home completely at their mercy, and that Julian would simply turn around and walk away from a messy domestic dispute. They expected me to break down crying. They expected me to beg for my mother's forgiveness or plead with Trent to let me keep my own money. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The burning pain in my abdomen faded into the background, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. I looked at Julian. He did not look panicked. He did not look intimidated by Trent's hollow threats. He simply looked at me, giving me a subtle nod, silently handing the floor back over to me. I slowly reached into my own purse, feeling the smooth, cold metal of the device I had been carrying all day. My family had just played their final card, but they had absolutely no idea what kind of game we were actually playing. Before I could fully retrieve the device from my purse, my mother decided to completely bury herself. She stepped around the shattered crystal on the hardwood floor, her eyes gleaming with a sick, twisted sense of victory. She was absolutely vibrating with pride, eager to take full credit for the masterful trap she believed she had just sprung. "I want you to know that I handled everything myself," Brenda boasted, smoothing down the front of her expensive blouse. "I did not want Jada to carry the emotional burden of having an unstable sister, so I took the initiative. I went down to the county courthouse the second the hospital confirmed you were under general anesthesia. It was the perfect window. You could not contest the emergency filing, and the judge was incredibly sympathetic to a mother trying to save her daughter from self-destruction." I stared at her, feeling the cold reality of her words sink into my bones. While I was lying unconscious on an operating table surrounded by surgeons working to save a young child's life, my own mother was standing before a judge, committing perjury to steal my freedom. "You committed perjury," I stated, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "You lied to a judge to steal my assets." "I did not lie about anything," Brenda snapped back, her tone sharp and defensive. "I told the judge exactly what you were doing, and he agreed that your actions prove you are an absolute danger to yourself. No sane, rational woman in her mid-30s sneaks off to a hospital to give away a vital organ to a complete stranger. It is unnatural. It is a severe form of self-mutilation, Camille. You are clearly having a psychological breakdown, and you are using this ridiculous surgery to punish us for being happy." The sheer audacity of her logic was staggering. She had somehow managed to twist the act of saving a dying child into a malicious attack against her and Jada. She could not comprehend genuine generosity because she had never possessed a single ounce of it herself. To Brenda, everything in life was a transaction. "And because you are clearly incapable of making sound decisions, I am stepping in as the matriarch of this family to fix your mess," Brenda continued, lifting her chin with arrogant authority. "I took the court order straight to your primary bank at noon today. I am the legal conservator of your estate now. I have full authorization to manage your accounts, your investments, and this property." Trent let out a loud, relieved sigh, running a hand through his hair. Jada crossed her arms over her chest, a smug, satisfied smile spreading across her face. They were looking at my mother as if she were a conquering hero who had just won a war. "I already initiated the first wire transfers," Brenda announced casually, as if she were discussing the weather rather than grand larceny. "Trent has been dealing with some complicated business investments lately. He needs immediate capital to secure a major deal that will benefit all of us in the long run. Since you have been selfishly hoarding your massive salary, I authorized a transfer of $200,000 from your savings to his checking account to clear his debts." My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of panic, but out of sheer disbelief at her willingness to confess her crimes out loud in front of a billionaire CEO. She had no idea that the complicated business investments she was paying off were actually massive fraudulent debts Trent had accrued through corporate embezzlement. "You stole $200,000 from my savings to pay off his credit cards," I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "I reallocated family resources for the greater good." Brenda corrected me smoothly, completely devoid of guilt. "Do not use that tone with me, Camille. You have too much money and too little sense. Jada is a wife to a soon-to-be vice president. She has appearances to keep up. She needs to host events, buy proper wardrobes, and maintain a certain lifestyle that reflects Trent's status. You sit in an office all day looking at spreadsheets. You do not need millions of dollars sitting uselessly in a bank account while your sister struggles to maintain her rightful place in society." She took a step closer to me, her expression hardening into a glare of absolute entitlement. "We are a family, Camille. Family takes care of each other. I am doing this for the greater good of all of us. You should be down on your knees thanking me for stepping in and taking this heavy financial burden off your shoulders before you did something even more psychotic with your money." I glanced over at Julian. He was standing perfectly still, his hands resting casually in his pockets. His face was an unreadable mask of corporate stoicism, but I could see the dangerous glint in his dark eyes. He was silently observing the exact kind of toxic parasite I had been dealing with my entire life. He was a human lie detector, and he was currently listening to my mother confess to financial abuse, fraud, and theft, all neatly wrapped in the guise of maternal care. Trent completely misread Julian's silence. He thought Julian's lack of intervention meant he agreed with the conservatorship. Trent stepped forward again, puffing his chest out. You heard her, Camille. Your money is family money now. Mom is in charge. So I suggest you drop this defiant attitude. Apologize to my wife and get into that kitchen before I decide to cut off your weekly allowance entirely. The illusion they had built for themselves was so incredibly thick, so entirely insulated from reality, that they actually thought they had won. They thought the piece of paper Brenda held was a magical shield that would protect them from the consequences of their actions. They wanted to talk about my medical procedure as if it were a dirty secret. They wanted to use my scars against me. I decided it was time to show them exactly what those scars represented. You are so quiet now, Camille. My mother scoffed, completely misinterpreting my silence as defeat. You know I am right. You have always used exaggerated illnesses to get out of your responsibilities. You probably just had some minor cosmetic procedure and convinced the hospital to keep you overnight. You are standing right here in front of us, perfectly fine, yet you expect us to believe you are too weak to chop some vegetables and put a roast in the oven. It is pathetic. Jada nodded in agreement, leaning her weight against Trent. She is just trying to make us feel sorry for her so she does not have to work, Jada chimed in. She has been doing this since we were kids. Always playing the victim whenever someone else is meant to be the center of attention. I kept my eyes locked directly on my mother. I slowly moved my hands from my sides and grasped the top button of my trench coat. My fingers were trembling slightly from the sheer physical exhaustion radiating through my bones, but my resolve was absolute. I did not say a word as I unfastened the first button. Then the second. Then the third. What are you doing? Brenda snapped, her face twisting with sudden irritation. Are you trying to put on a show for Mr. Sterling? I am your legal conservator now, Camille. You need to show some respect and put yourself together. I ignored her. I gripped the heavy fabric of the coat and pulled it wide open, letting it slide off my shoulders and fall in a heap on the hardwood floor. Underneath, I was wearing a loose, thin hospital shirt. I reached down and slowly lifted the hem of the shirt, exposing my entire abdomen to the brightly lit foyer. The sudden, sharp intake of breath from Jada was the first sound to break the heavy silence. Across my stomach, stretching from my side toward my navel, was a massive, thick layer of medical gauze and surgical tape. The pristine white bandages were not clean. They were heavily stained with dark, fresh blood that had seeped through the layers during the long, painful car ride home. The surgical drain tube was still taped securely against my hip, a visible, visceral reminder of the violent medical trauma my body had just endured. The bruising around the entire incision site was a deep, angry purple, stark and horrifying under the bright glow of the crystal chandelier. This was not a paper cut. This was not a minor outpatient cosmetic procedure. An entire organ had been surgically carved out of my body less than 48 hours ago. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and my mother. I did not flinch. I did not cover myself to spare her feelings. I stood there actively bleeding in my own foyer, forcing her to look at the devastating physical toll of what I had done. Look at it, I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings with a chilling, undeniable authority. Look at the reality of what you are calling a dramatic stunt. Brenda physically recoiled. She took a panicked step backward, her expensive leather shoes crunching loudly on the broken glass from the shattered vase. She pressed her manicured hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with sudden raw shock. The sterile, perfectly curated world she lived in was abruptly contaminated by the brutal reality of my physical sacrifice. She could not look away from the dark red blood staining the white bandages. While you were down at the courthouse committing perjury and lying to a judge, I was lying on an operating table with my abdomen cut completely open, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. A 7-year-old girl was dying of renal failure in the pediatric wing. She was on dialysis, waiting for a miracle, because her own family was not a match. So I gave her my kidney. I let a surgeon remove a piece of my own body so a little black girl could have a chance to grow up and actually live a life. I took another deliberate step toward her, my eyes blazing with 20 years of suppressed rage. And I came home to the mother who birthed me, hoping for just 1 ounce of basic human decency. Instead, you demanded I put on an apron and cook a gourmet meal for the man who is secretly destroying your golden child's life. You called my sacrifice a stunt. You used my medical incapacitation as a weapon to steal my money. Trent turned his head away suddenly, completely unable to look at me. Jada looked visibly sick, covering her mouth as she stared in horror at the surgical drain attached to my side. For a brief fleeting second, I thought I saw a flash of genuine maternal remorse cross my mother's face. I thought the undeniable proof of my trauma might finally break through her impenetrable wall of narcissism. But Brenda was entirely incapable of experiencing shame. Her pride was far too massive to allow her to admit she was wrong in front of an audience. She slowly lowered her hand from her mouth. She stood up straighter, her face hardening into a defensive, ugly scowl. She completely refused to acknowledge the gravity of what she had just seen. "Well, that was incredibly reckless of you," Brenda said, her voice shaking slightly, but her tone remaining as cruel as ever. "You compromised your own health for a complete stranger. It just proves my point entirely, Camille. You are acting erratically. A sensible, rational woman would never put herself in that kind of physical danger, unless she was mentally unstable. I made the right choice by taking control of your finances. You clearly cannot be trusted to protect yourself." The absolute lack of empathy was breathtaking. She had looked directly at my bleeding wounds and weaponized them against me all over again. She felt absolutely nothing for the agonizing pain I was in. She only cared about maintaining her false narrative and keeping her grip on my bank accounts. I slowly lowered my shirt, covering the bloody bandages. I did not feel hurt by her vicious words anymore. I only felt a cold, clinical detachment. She had just confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was beyond saving. There was no mother left inside that woman. There was only a toxic parasite. And it was finally time to cut the parasite out of my life permanently. I turned my attention away from Brenda and looked directly at Trent. He had been standing quietly against the wall, hoping my mother's cruelty would shield him from the storm. He was dead wrong. Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of Trent trying to hide from the mess he created, my mother decided she had not quite finished insulting me. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest and looked at me with an expression of pure financial calculation. "If you were so desperate to get rid of a vital organ, you could have at least been smart about it," Brenda said, her voice dripping with absolute resentment. "Do you have any idea how much a healthy kidney from a woman your age goes for on the private medical market? People pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for those kinds of matches. If you really wanted to prove your worth to this family, you should have sold it." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if she had lost her mind entirely. "Trent is sitting here stressing over massive business capital," Brenda continued, completely oblivious to how monstrous she sounded. "He works day and night to provide a life of luxury for your sister. You knew he needed money for his investments. Instead of helping him, you just gave away a literal gold mine for free to some random sick child. It is not just reckless, Camille. It is incredibly financially irresponsible. You stole from your own family." Trent visibly perked up at my mother's horrific words. The validation acted like a powerful drug to his bruised ego. Hearing Brenda explicitly prioritize his fake business ventures over my own physical body gave him exactly the boost of confidence he needed. He stepped away from the wall, his posture immediately transforming back into that of an arrogant corporate overlord. He walked over to the entryway table, standing right next to the shattered crystal vase, and placed his hand firmly on top of the blue legal folder containing the conservatorship papers. "Brenda is absolutely right," Trent said, his voice regaining that familiar condescending edge. "You have zero concept of loyalty, Camille. You have always been completely selfish. But thankfully, we do not have to rely on your poor judgment anymore." He picked up the legal document and waved it in the air like a winning lottery ticket. He looked at Julian, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across his pale face. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and lifted his chin, completely delusional about the reality of his situation. "As you can see, Mr. Sterling, my mother-in-law has full legal authority over your lead executive now," Trent announced proudly. "And as the head of this family, she has explicitly appointed me to manage the household assets. This means I am officially in control of Camille bank accounts, her stock portfolios, and the deed to this property." Trent actually had the audacity to take a step toward Julian. His chest puffed out completely, forgetting how easily the billionaire had physically overpowered him just moments before. The piece of paper in his hand made him feel invincible. "I will be contacting the Vanguard Holdings Human Resources Department first thing tomorrow morning." Trent continued smoothly outlining his grand master plan. "Since I am now managing her entire estate, all of Camille's future paychecks, quarterly bonuses, and corporate stock options will need to be routed directly into my primary checking account. Furthermore, we will be placing her on an indefinite medical leave of absence without pay until I personally decide she is mentally fit to return to the office." I watched Trent outline his fantasy of controlling my Vanguard salary. It was a fascinating display of pure, unadulterated greed. He was standing in a house I bought wearing a suit I paid for, planning to steal the salary I earned, all to cover up the fact that he had been secretly robbing Vanguard Holdings blind for the last 2 years. He thought the conservatorship was his ultimate salvation. He thought the $200,000 my mother had just illegally wired into his account was going to save him from federal prison. He had absolutely no idea that I had been tracking his offshore shell accounts for 6 months. Jada walked over and wrapped her arm around Trent's waist, looking at me with a triumphant smirk. "Finally, someone is going to put you in your place," Jada sneered. "You thought you could just hold your money over our heads forever. Now Trent is in charge and you are going to have to ask him for an allowance just to buy groceries." Trent nodded, basking in his wife's adoration. He turned his attention back to Julian, pointing a finger toward the open front door. "Since Camille is legally incapacitated, she has absolutely no authority to invite anyone into my home. I am the man of this house, Mr. Sterling. And as the man of this house, I am ordering you to leave my property immediately. If you want to discuss corporate matters regarding my sister-in-law, you can make an appointment with my secretary at the office." The absolute silence that followed his grand speech was heavy and suffocating. Trent stood there waiting for Julian to apologize and walk out the door. He actually believed he had just successfully intimidated a billionaire. He believed he had successfully stolen my entire life's work with a single forged court document. He thought he was walking away with my house, my savings, and my future earnings. Julian did not move a single muscle. He looked at Trent with an expression of profound, almost clinical fascination, like a scientist observing a particularly stupid insect walking directly into a trap. Julian slowly turned his head and looked at me, giving me a subtle nod. The stage was entirely mine. I reached deep into my leather purse, my fingers bypassing the pain medication the hospital had given me and wrapped around the cold metal of my smartphone. I pulled it out and unlocked the screen with a steady hand. My family watched me in silence, expecting me to call a lawyer or perhaps beg for mercy. Instead, I opened my encrypted banking application and held the screen up so the bright red warning banner was clearly visible to everyone in the room. I looked directly at Brenda, who was still standing tall with her stolen legal documents, and then shifted my gaze to Trent, whose smug smile was permanently plastered on his face. "You can try to take my money, Mom," I said flatly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "But you are going to have a very hard time seizing bank accounts that are currently frozen by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The smug smile on Trent's face vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Brenda frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. She took a step forward, squinting at the bright red text on my phone screen, completely unable to process the words. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Brenda demanded, though her voice wavered slightly. "The FBI does not freeze civilian bank accounts over a medical conservatorship. You are lying. You just locked your own accounts to keep Trent from getting the capital he needs." "I am not lying, and this has absolutely nothing to do with your pathetic conservatorship," I replied smoothly. I locked eyes with Trent, watching the beads of sweat rapidly forming on his forehead. "You see, Mom, I am the lead forensic accountant for Vanguard Holdings. Do you know what forensic accountants actually do? We track stolen money. We find the financial leaks that corporate executives try to hide." I paused for a fraction of a second, letting the weight of my words press down on Trent's chest. For the last 6 months, I have been working in complete secrecy alongside Julian and federal authorities to build a criminal case against a massive embezzlement ring operating inside Vanguard's regional office. I explained, my voice echoing clearly through the foyer. Someone had been systematically siphoning millions of dollars from corporate accounts and hiding it in offshore shell companies. And I tracked every single stolen penny back to one specific mid-level manager. Trent stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. His knees hit the edge of the console table, and he gripped the wood tight enough to turn his knuckles completely white. Jada let go of his arm, suddenly realizing her husband was shaking violently. "Trent, what is she talking about?" Jada asked, her voice shrill with sudden panic. I did not let Trent answer. I kept my focus entirely on my mother, who was still clutching the blue legal folder as if it could somehow protect her from federal law. When I went into the hospital for my surgery, I knew I would be completely offline for several days. I continued. So as a standard security protocol, I flagged my personal banking accounts with the FBI task force monitoring Trent's financial activity. If any large, unusual wire transfers were initiated from my accounts into his, it would immediately trigger an automatic freeze and alert the authorities. Brenda dropped the legal folder. It hit the floor with a soft thud, landing right next to the shattered crystal. Her face turned the color of ash. The arrogance that had fueled her for the last 20 minutes completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but cold, paralyzing fear. "You just confessed to initiating a $200,000 wire transfer into an account that is currently under federal investigation for corporate embezzlement," I told my mother, watching her entire world collapse in real time. "You bypassed my bank security using an emergency conservatorship obtained under false pretenses. Do you understand what that means? You just made yourself an active accessory to federal wire fraud." "No!" Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. "No, that is not true. Trent told me it was for a legitimate business investment. He said he needed the capital to secure a real estate deal. I am your conservator. I have the right to move family funds. You moved stolen funds." Julian finally spoke up, his deep voice slicing through my mother's desperate excuses. "The accounts you wired that money into are monitored by the federal government. By attempting to fund Trent's escape with Camille's money, you have directly implicated yourself in a multi-million-dollar federal crime." Jada let out a piercing, terrified scream. She spun around and shoved Trent hard in the chest. "You stole money from your company!" she shrieked, her perfectly curated life flashing before her eyes. "You told me you got a massive bonus. You told me you bought my diamond watch with your promotion money." Trent was hyperventilating. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. He was trapped in the foyer of a house he did not own, caught in a web of lies he could no longer maintain, standing face to face with the billionaire he had stolen from and the sister-in-law who had just checkmated his entire existence. "This is a setup," Trent yelled desperately, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She set me up. She is trying to ruin my life because she is jealous of our marriage. Jada, you have to believe me. Brenda, call your lawyer right now. We have to leave." "You are not going anywhere, Trent," I said calmly. Because that freeze on my account did not just stop your little wire transfer. It also sent an automatic ping to the federal agents who have been sitting in unmarked cars outside this house for the last 20 minutes, waiting for Julian to give them the green light. Right on cue, the heavy, blinding glare of red and blue police lights suddenly illuminated the large front windows of my house, casting long, frantic shadows across the foyer walls. The party was officially over. The red and blue lights pulsed through the sheer living room curtains, painting the foyer in violent, flashing strokes of color. The heavy silence inside my house was entirely replaced by the low, steady hum of police cruiser engines idling at the end of my driveway. Trent pressed his back flat against the wall, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked exactly like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. Jada grabbed her own hair, her perfect salon blowout ruined as she violently tugged at the strands in sheer panic. She looked at the flashing windows and then turned her horrified gaze toward her husband. "Tell them it is a mistake, Trent," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "Tell them Camille is lying right now. You are getting promoted tomorrow morning. You are the vice president of regional acquisitions." "There is no promotion, Jada," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her hysterical denial. I took a deliberate step toward the center of the foyer, commanding the space completely. There never was a vice president position available in his division. That entire narrative was a carefully constructed corporate fiction. It was designed to keep your husband complacent and in the state of Georgia while we finalized the federal indictments against him. My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to comprehend the absolute magnitude of the situation. "But you are just a bookkeeper," Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of a police radio crackling outside. "You just process expense reports for the lower departments. You do not have the clearance to launch an investigation." I shook my head, feeling a profound sense of pity mixed with absolute unwavering vindication. "That is what you desperately wanted to believe, Mom. You and Jada needed to convince yourselves that my career was insignificant so you could justify worshipping Trent. You needed me to be a failure and you needed him to be a hero. But you chose to worship a thief and you chose to underestimate a forensic accountant." I turned my attention back to Trent. He was shaking so hard his teeth were visibly chattering. "For the last 6 months, Jada has been mocking me for working 80-hour weeks," I said loudly, ensuring every word resonated in the large room. She bragged to our entire extended family about how Trent was always home by 5 o'clock to take her out to expensive dinners. She told everyone I was chained to a cubicle doing grunt work because I lacked ambition. But I was not doing grunt work. I was working late because of him. I pointed a firm finger toward Julian, who stood tall and silent by the doorway, radiating absolute authority. 6 months ago, Mr. Sterling flagged a series of highly sophisticated financial anomalies originating directly from the Southeastern Regional Corporate Office. Millions of dollars were quietly bleeding out of the quarterly operating budgets. The losses were so deeply buried in fake corporate jargon and manipulated ledgers that the standard internal auditors missed them entirely. Julian bypassed the standard chain of command. I continued pacing slowly across the Brazilian cherry hardwood floor. He came directly to me. He handed me the raw financial data and gave me unrestricted executive clearance to tear the regional office apart from the inside out. We held private encrypted meetings every single night. While Trent was taking you to 5-star restaurants on stolen corporate credit cards, Jada, I was sitting in a secure executive boardroom tracing every single fraudulent transaction he ever authorized. Trent let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, sliding down the wall slightly. Jada backed away from him as if he were suddenly carrying a deadly virus. It was not even a particularly brilliant scheme, I noted, looking at Trent with undisguised professional contempt. "You are not a criminal mastermind, Trent. You are just a greedy, arrogant middle manager who got sloppy. You created phantom vendors for consulting services that never actually existed. You authorized massive payouts to these fake companies and then funneled the stolen cash through a labyrinth of offshore shell accounts." I looked deliberately at Jada's wrists where her $50,000 diamond watch glittered offensively under the harsh flashing police lights. You thought you were so much smarter than everyone else, I said to Trent, shaking my head. You thought because you dressed in expensive tailored suits and used big corporate buzzwords at family dinners, nobody would ever look closely at your actual accounting output. You used Vanguard Holdings as your personal piggy bank to fund a lifestyle you could never afford on your mediocre salary. My mother looked down at the blue legal folder resting on the floor, the conservatorship documents she had been so incredibly proud of just 5 minutes ago. The devastating realization of what she had done was finally cementing itself in her brain. She had illegally hijacked my bank account and committed perjury just to pay off the debts of a man who was actively being hunted by the federal government. And the worst part, Trent, is that you actually thought you survived the corporate audit last month, I said, driving the final nail into his coffin. You strutted around this house, bragging to my mother about how you outsmarted the federal regulators. You thought your cooked books passed inspection, but the audit was never closed. It was a strategic pause. Julian and I intentionally let you think you were in the clear, so you would relax, let your guard down, and make one final desperate mistake to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I paused, letting the heavy weight of my next words sink into the room. And tonight, thanks to my mother abusing the legal system to wire stolen money into a frozen account, the two of you handed the FBI that final piece of evidence on a silver platter. I reached back into my purse and pulled out a small, silver encrypted flash drive. It felt incredibly heavy in my palm, containing thousands of pages of irrefutable financial evidence. I walked over to the console table and dropped the flash drive right on top of my mother's precious blue conservatorship folder. The metal clinked sharply against the wood, sounding exactly like a lock clicking shut on a prison cell. Everything is on this drive, I said, tapping my finger against the cool silver casing. Every altered invoice, every forged signature, every single offshore wire transfer. But the most interesting part of your entire operation, Trent, was how you decided to protect yourself. Trent squeezed his eyes shut. He pressed his palms flat against the wall behind him, as if he were trying to push himself through the drywall to escape. He knew exactly what I was about to say next. I turned my attention to Jada. She was still clutching her hair, her eyes darting between me and the flashing police lights illuminating our front lawn. She was breathing heavily, terrified of losing her country club memberships and her luxury cars. But she had no idea the danger she was actually in. You see, Jada, I continued, my tone shifting to a clinical, razor-sharp delivery. When a man steals millions of dollars from a massive corporation, he does not just put it into his personal checking account. He has to hide it. Trent set up a complex network of offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands to receive the stolen Vanguard funds. But Trent is a coward. He knew that if the feds ever caught on, whoever owned those shell companies would be the one facing decades in federal prison. Jada stopped breathing. Her hands slowly dropped from her hair. She stared at me, the blood draining completely from her face as the realization began to dawn on her. He did not put his own name on the corporate registration documents, I told her, my voice unwavering. He used your name, Jada. He used your social security number. He forged your signature on the incorporation papers. Every single shell company that currently holds Vanguard Holdings' stolen money is legally registered to you. He set you up to be the ultimate fall guy. Jada's jaw dropped open. A guttural, agonizing sound escaped her throat. She spun around to face Trent, completely abandoning any remaining loyalty she had for the man. "You put my name on the accounts!" she shrieked, her voice echoing violently through the foyer. "You made me an accomplice! You set me up to go to prison for you!" Trent held his hands up defensively, a pathetic, trembling gesture. "Jada, sweetheart, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I did it to protect our assets. I thought if they were in your name, they would be safe from corporate audits. I was doing it for us. I was trying to give you the life you always wanted. Do not you dare say you did this for me!" Jada screamed, lunging forward and striking his chest with her fists. "You used me. You ruined my life." I watched the golden couple tear each other apart with absolute satisfaction. Their entire marriage was built on a foundation of lies, greed, and extreme narcissism. Now that the money was gone, there was absolutely nothing left but pure, venomous self-preservation. But Trent's humiliation was not quite complete. He still clung to one last desperate delusion. "This is insane," Trent yelled, pushing Jada away from him and turning back to Julian. "Mr. Sterling, you know my value. You know I am the top performer in my division. You are promoting me to vice president tomorrow morning. The board already approved it. You cannot send me to prison when you are about to give me the keys to the regional executive suite." Julian stepped away from the front door, moving slowly into the center of the room. He looked at Trent with a chilling, detached emptiness. "You truly are the most arrogant fool I have ever employed," Julian said quietly. "Did you really think Vanguard Holdings would promote a man who cannot even balance a basic departmental ledger without leaving a trail of financial irregularities?" Trent's eyes widened. "But the email," he stammered. "Human Resources sent me an official email last week scheduling my vice president initiation dinner. I sent that email. I revealed completely shattering his final defense. I drafted the promotion letter and Julian authorized it." Trent stared at me, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. "We knew you were getting paranoid," I explained, crossing my arms over my chest. "3 weeks ago, you started booking one-way flights to countries without extradition treaties. You were planning to take the money and run, leaving Jada behind to take the fall for the federal indictments. We needed to keep you in Atlanta just a little bit longer while the FBI secured the final warrants for your arrest." I watched the realization hit him like a freight train. "So we dangled the one thing you care about more than money," I said, my voice dripping with absolute scorn. "Your ego. We invented a fake vice president position. We told you a massive promotion and a 7-figure bonus were waiting for you at the end of the month. And just like a greedy, predictable rat, you stayed right here in the trap. You were so desperate for the prestige and the power that you completely ignored the walls closing in around you." The vice president promotion was a lie, I finalized, driving the point home. "The celebratory dinner you tried to force me to cook tonight was a lie. Your entire corporate existence is a lie. The only thing waiting for you tomorrow morning is an orange jumpsuit and a federal judge." Trent collapsed. His knees physically gave out, and he sank to the hardwood floor, landing heavily amidst the shattered crystal from the broken vase. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob. He was completely defeated. Every single lie he had ever told had been exposed, and his fake empire had been burned entirely to the ground. But the night was far from over. My mother and sister were about to learn that they were not immune to the consequences of their own toxic actions. The flashing blue and red lights from the police cruisers outside cut through the living room windows, casting sharp, frantic shadows across the walls. For Jada, those lights were not just a signal of Trent's downfall. They were a blinding spotlight, exposing her own impending doom. She stared down at the sobbing mess of a man on the floor, sitting in the shattered remains of a crystal vase. The $50,000 diamond watch on her wrist caught the harsh glare of the police lights, suddenly looking less like a status symbol and much more like a pair of platinum handcuffs. Something inside my sister completely snapped. She let out a guttural, terrifying scream and threw herself onto Trent. Her fists rained down on his shoulders, his chest, and the back of his expensive tailored suit. "You set me up!" Jada shrieked, her voice tearing through her throat with absolute ferocity. "You put my name on those offshore accounts. You made me the owner of those shell companies. I am going to federal prison because of you." Trent cowered on the hardwood floor, raising his arms to shield his face from her manic blows. He sobbed uncontrollably, offering pathetic apologies that meant absolutely nothing. Jada kicked at his legs, her designer heels scraping aggressively against the floorboards. "Tell them it was you!" she demanded, her chest heaving as tears of pure terror streamed down her perfectly contoured face. "You have to tell the FBI I did not know anything about the stolen money. You are going to take the blame for all of this, Trent, or I swear I will kill you myself." My mother rushed forward, grabbing Jada by the shoulders and physically dragging her off her husband. But Brenda's eyes were not focused on comforting her golden child. Her gaze was locked entirely onto the small silver flash drive resting on the entryway table. It was the physical evidence, the smoking gun, the undeniable proof that would tear her pristine, carefully curated world completely apart. Brenda smoothed her hair with shaking hands, her breathing ragged. She turned away from Trent and Jada and looked directly at me. The cruel, arrogant matriarch who had just mocked my medical surgery vanished entirely. In her place stood a desperate, cornered woman, preparing to play her absolute final emotional card. "Camille, listen to me," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a frantic, urgent whisper, as if the federal agents outside could somehow hear us through the heavy oak door. "You have proved your point. You showed us how smart you are. You won. But you need to pick up that flash drive right now and put it back in your purse." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer audacity vibrating in her voice. "You want me to hide federal evidence from the FBI?" I asked, my tone flat and unyielding. Brenda stepped over the broken glass, closing the distance between us. She reached out and tried to grab my hands, a gesture of maternal affection she had not offered me in 20 years. I took a deliberate step backward, completely disgusted by the thought of her touch. "I am talking about our family." Camille, Brenda pleaded, her eyes wide and manic. "I am talking about Black family unity. Think about how this looks. The neighbors are out on their porches watching right now. If those federal agents come marching through that door and drag Trent out of here in handcuffs, it is going to destroy our reputation in this entire community." She gestured wildly toward the front windows. "A white man arrested in our home stealing millions of dollars from his corporate employer. Do you know what the people at church will say about us? Do you know the absolute shame and humiliation this will bring upon me and your sister? Everyone will look at us like we are criminals." The shame, I repeated, my voice rising over the low hum of the police sirens idling in my driveway. "You are worried about the neighborhood gossip while your daughter is facing federal wire fraud charges. That is exactly why you have to stop this immediately," Brenda insisted, stepping forward again to invade my personal space. She was completely weaponizing our racial dynamics to protect a man who had treated me like garbage. "If you hand over that drive, you are sending a white man to a federal penitentiary, but you are dragging your own Black sister down with him. The criminal justice system will not show Jada any mercy, Camille, and you know that better than anyone. They will make an example out of her. You are going to ruin her entire life." Brenda pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest, her gaslighting reaching an entirely new level of toxicity. "And if Jada goes to prison, you will be the reason this family is destroyed. It will be entirely your fault. You can turn around right now and tell Mr. Sterling that you made a mistake in your forensic calculations. You can fix this. We can sell the cars and quietly pay the money back. Do not tear your own blood apart." I looked at the woman who birthed me. She was actively trying to make me feel guilty for stopping a federal criminal. She was manipulating the very real fears of the justice system to force me into protecting a thief, simply because admitting I was right meant admitting she had backed a massive loser. "You do not get to use Black family unity as a shield when you have spent my entire life tearing me down," I said, making sure every single word hit her like a physical blow. "You did not care about family unity when you went to a judge this morning and lied under oath to steal my money. You did not care about family unity when you stood in this very foyer and told me I should have sold my kidney on the black market to pay off Trent's credit cards. You only care about unity when you are the one facing the devastating consequences of your own actions." Julian remained perfectly silent by the front door, allowing me to completely dismantle my mother's final illusion. He was the silent witness to her absolute moral bankruptcy. "I am not destroying this family, Mom," I finalized, my voice cold, sharp, and absolute. "Trent destroyed it the second he decided to embezzle corporate funds. Jada destroyed it the second she chose to live a life of luxury funded by stolen money. And you destroyed it the second you decided to protect a white criminal instead of your own flesh and blood." I looked past her, fixing my gaze on the heavy front door. "That flash drive stays exactly where it is. And you are going to stand right here and watch the authorities take everything he owns." My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I completely cut her off. "You spent your entire life teaching Jada to judge people based on their bank accounts and their background," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "But the truth does not have a skin color, Mom. A thief is a thief. Trent chose to steal, and he is going to face the exact same justice system that anyone else would. I will not compromise my own integrity to protect a man who has spent years tearing me down just to make himself feel superior." Brenda finally went completely silent. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, realizing that her absolute authority over me was entirely gone. Her emotional manipulation had completely failed. From the floor, Trent let out a sudden guttural sound. It was not a sob this time. It was the raw, desperate noise of a cornered animal, realizing its absolute demise. He looked at the heavy oak front door, then at the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the sheer curtains. The heavy footsteps of federal agents crunching up my gravel driveway echoed through the quiet night air. Trent's panicked gaze snapped toward the entryway table. He zeroed in on the small silver flash drive resting right on top of my mother's blue conservatorship folder. His mind violently short-circuited. In his desperate, entirely irrational state, he believed that if he could just destroy that tiny piece of metal, he could somehow erase the millions of dollars he had stolen and make the federal indictments disappear. Trent scrambled to his feet, completely ignoring the sharp pieces of crystal glass digging into the knees of his expensive trousers. He let out a furious, unhinged roar and violently shoved my mother out of the way. Brenda stumbled backward with a gasp as Trent lunged directly at me. His hands were outstretched, his fingers hooked like claws, aiming straight for the flash drive on the table beside me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, violent desperation. He did not care about my fresh surgical wounds. He did not care that he was about to assault his sister-in-law in her own home. He only cared about saving himself. I instinctively took a step back, raising my arms to protect my abdomen, but I did not need to defend myself. Before Trent could even close the distance between us, Julian completely intercepted him. Julian did not shout or hesitate. He moved with a terrifying, calculated precision. He stepped smoothly into Trent's path, grabbed the lapels of Trent's tailored navy suit, and used Trent's own violent momentum against him. With one effortless, powerful motion, Julian twisted his body and slammed Trent face first into the Brazilian cherry hardwood floor. The impact shook the entire foyer. Trent let out a sharp cry of pain as the breath was completely knocked out of his lungs. He immediately began thrashing wildly, kicking his legs and trying to buck Julian off his back. But Julian was immovable. He pressed his heavy knee directly between Trent's shoulder blades, pinning him securely against the floorboards. Julian grabbed both of Trent's wrists and wrenched them sharply behind his back, locking him in a hold that made it entirely impossible for him to move a single inch. "Stay exactly where you are," Julian commanded, his deep voice, radiating absolute lethal authority. "Do not make this any worse for yourself than it already is." Jada screamed, pressing herself flat against the living room wall, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror. Brenda was completely paralyzed, staring at her perfect son-in-law pinned to the ground like a common criminal. Trent gasped for air, his cheek pressed firmly against the cold wood tears of pure defeat streaming down his face. The silver flash drive remained completely untouched on the table, glittering mockingly in the chaotic light. At that exact moment, the heavy brass handle of my front door turned aggressively. "FBI, open the door," a loud, booming voice commanded from the porch. I did not even have to unlock it. The door was shoved open with immense force, and the chaotic energy of the outside world flooded directly into my pristine foyer. 3 heavily armed federal agents marched into the house, their tactical vests standing in stark contrast to the elegant crystal chandelier hanging above them. The flashing red and blue lights from their cruisers completely overwhelmed the space, illuminating the absolute destruction of my family's false empire. The night of reckoning had officially arrived, and there was absolutely nowhere left for any of them to hide. "Do not look at me!" Jada screamed, her voice completely devoid of the wifely devotion she had performed just an hour ago. She pushed herself off the living room wall and stumbled backward, putting as much physical distance between herself and Trent as the foyer would allow. The lead federal agent paused, raising an eyebrow as he looked at my sister. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this," Jada declared, holding her hands up as if Trent was suddenly infected with a highly contagious disease. "I do not know anything about Vanguard Holdings. I do not know anything about corporate ledgers. He told me he was getting a massive promotion. He told me he was a top executive. I am a victim here. He lied to me just like he lied to everyone else." Trent stopped struggling against the agents. His entire body went completely rigid. The tears that had been streaming down his face seemed to freeze. He stared at Jada, his mouth opening and closing in silent, absolute devastation. The woman he had stolen millions of dollars for, the woman whose lavish lifestyle he had destroyed his own future to maintain, was tossing him to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. "Jada, how can you say that?" Trent whispered, his voice broken and hollow. "I bought you everything. You bought it with stolen money." Jada fired back, her tone vicious and completely unhinged. "You made me look like a fool. You forged my name on those offshore shell companies. You stole my identity, Trent. Officer, you need to add identity theft to his charges. I want to press charges against him right now. He used my social security number without my permission." I watched the entire spectacle with a cold, clinical fascination. Jada had always been a master of self-preservation. Growing up, whenever she broke one of my mother's expensive vases or ruined a piece of clothing, she would instantly burst into tears and point her finger directly at me. It was her innate survival mechanism. But watching her deploy that exact same childhood tactic against her husband while federal agents held him in handcuffs was truly a sight to behold. "You are playing the victim very convincingly, Jada," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical performance. "But I think the federal investigators are going to have a very hard time believing you were entirely clueless." Jada whipped her head toward me, her eyes wide and manic. "Shut up, Camille," she hissed. "You know I do not understand finance." "You understand luxury," I replied smoothly. I took a few steps forward, pointing directly at her trembling left hand. "You are currently wearing a solid platinum diamond-encrusted watch that retails for $50,000. Trent brings home a base salary of $85,000 a year. You did not think it was mathematically suspicious when your mid-level management husband bought you a piece of jewelry that costs more than half his annual income." Jada looked down at her wrist as if the watch had suddenly caught fire. She gasped, grabbing the diamond-studded band and frantically tugging at the clasp. Her perfectly manicured nails chipped as she desperately tried to undo the complicated platinum lock. "I thought it was his end-of-year bonus," Jada cried out, her chest heaving as she finally ripped the watch off her wrist. She held it out toward the federal agents like a piece of toxic waste. "Take it! I do not want it. I am surrendering it as evidence. I will give you the cars. I will give you the country club memberships. Just keep me out of this. I am perfectly willing to testify against him in federal court if you grant me full immunity." Trent let out a sound that I could only describe as the complete shattering of a human soul. His legs physically gave out again, and the two agents had to haul him upward by his armpits just to keep him standing. He realized in that exact moment that his entire marriage was a transactional illusion. Jada did not love him. She had never loved him. She only loved the aesthetic of wealth he provided. And the second that wealth was exposed as a fraud, her loyalty completely evaporated. The lead federal agent did not take the watch. He simply pulled a small notepad from his tactical vest and jotted something down. "We will be seizing all assets purchased with the embezzled funds, ma'am," the agent stated coldly. "And as the legal owner of the offshore shell accounts, your financial records will be subject to a comprehensive federal review. Your cooperation will be noted by the prosecuting attorney." Jada let out a loud, pathetic sob, dropping the $50,000 watch onto the hardwood floor. It landed right next to the shattered crystal and the blue conservatorship folder. The magnificent pile of garbage that represented their entire fake empire was finally complete. "Get him out of here," the lead agent ordered, nodding toward his partners. The agents hauled Trent toward the open front door. He did not fight them anymore. All the fight, all the arrogance, and all the desperate delusion had been entirely drained out of him. He dragged his feet across the threshold, his head hanging in absolute defeat as the flashing red and blue lights swallowed him whole. He did not look back at my mother. He did not look back at Julian. And most tellingly, he did not look back at his wife. The heavy oak door swung partially shut behind them, dulling the sound of the police sirens outside. Jada collapsed against the living room wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, burying her face in her hands. She was breathing heavily, believing she had just successfully dodged a federal prison sentence by throwing her husband onto the tracks. But she was entirely wrong to feel safe. My mother and sister still had to answer to the actual owner of the house they were sitting in. As the federal agents dragged Trent toward the threshold, my mother suddenly snapped out of her state of complete paralysis. She lunged forward, throwing her body directly into the path of the heavy oak doorframe. She stretched her arms across the open doorway, physically blocking the authorities from taking her precious son-in-law any further. "You cannot do this!" Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with a desperate, misplaced authority. "You do not understand who he is. He is a respected corporate executive. My daughter just told you he is innocent and that he lied to her. You cannot just drag him out of his own house like a common thug based on some ridiculous spreadsheets." The lead agent did not even blink. He looked down at my mother with a mixture of absolute exhaustion and professional irritation. He did not care about her designer clothes or her haughty attitude. "Ma'am, step aside immediately," the agent warned her, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. "If you continue to obstruct a federal arrest, I will have no choice but to place you in handcuffs right next to him. And considering you have already confessed to wiring stolen money across state lines this afternoon, I highly suggest you get out of my way before I decide to take you downtown as well." The very real threat of her own arrest finally penetrated her thick skull. Brenda gasped, dropping her arms and stumbling backward against the entryway wall. She watched in sheer horror as the agents hauled Trent out into the humid Atlanta night. The heavy front door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the foyer like a final gavel strike. A few moments later, the flashing lights faded from the living room windows, and the wailing sirens disappeared completely into the distance. The house was suddenly suffocatingly quiet. Julian stood silently near the entryway console table, keeping a watchful eye on the remaining occupants. Jada was still sitting on the hardwood floor, rocking back and forth, crying uncontrollably over her lost luxury cars and her ruined social status. But my mother was not crying. Brenda slowly turned away from the front door. Her face was twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. She did not look at me like a mother looking at her child. She looked at me like I was a monster who had just slaughtered her entire world. "Are you happy now?" Brenda spat the words, dripping with absolute venom. "Is this what you wanted, Camille? Did you get the twisted satisfaction you were looking for tonight?" I stood my ground, ignoring the throbbing pain in my surgical incisions. "I did exactly what I was hired to do, Mom. I stopped a criminal from fleeing the country with stolen corporate funds." "You did not do this for Vanguard Holdings," Brenda screamed, taking a threatening step toward me. "Do not stand there and act like some righteous hero. You did this because you are a bitter, jealous woman. You have been jealous of your sister since the day she was born." Her gaslighting reached its absolute peak. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Jada, who was still sobbing amidst the shattered crystal. "Look at her," Brenda yelled, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. "Look at what you have done to her perfectly curated life. Jada had a beautiful marriage. She had a husband who adored her and provided for her. But you could not stand it, could you? You could not stand sitting alone in this massive house every single night, knowing that your younger sister had the fairy tale life you could never secure for yourself." The absolute delusion was staggering. She was literally defending a man who had forged her golden child signature and set her up for a federal prison sentence. "He forged her signature on offshore bank accounts, Mom," I reminded her sharply. "He was going to let Jada take the fall for millions of dollars in corporate fraud. He did not love her. He used her as a human shield to protect himself." He made a mistake, Brenda yelled back, completely dismissing the massive felony as if Trent had simply forgotten to take out the trash. He was under immense corporate pressure, but you orchestrated this entire operation just to tear them apart. You invited your billionaire boss into our home to humiliate us. You weaponized your accounting job to destroy your own flesh and blood. You are a cold, calculating sociopath. Brenda drew herself up to her full height, her eyes blazing with a terrifying, absolute finality. She prepared to deliver what she believed was the ultimate emotional death blow. I should have never let you into this family, she snarled, completely disregarding the biological fact that she gave birth to me. You have always been a dark cloud hanging over us. You think your money and your fancy degree make you superior. But you are nothing. You are a lonely, miserable woman who destroys everything she touches because you are entirely incapable of being loved. She took a deep breath, her chest heaving with fury. You are no daughter of mine, Brenda formally declared. I am disowning you. From this moment forward, I do not have an oldest daughter. I only have Jada. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone in our community knows exactly what you did to your own family tonight. She expected me to break down. She expected her formal rejection to shatter my heart into a million pieces. For 35 years, her maternal approval had been the ultimate prize I was conditioned to chase. I had bought this house, paid her bills, and sacrificed my own body just to earn a fraction of the love she freely handed to Jada. But looking at her now standing in the middle of my foyer, clutching her stolen conservatorship papers, while she defended a white criminal over her own black daughter, I felt absolutely nothing but immense, overwhelming relief. The heavy, suffocating chains of family loyalty were finally broken. She had just given me the greatest gift she could possibly offer. She had set me completely free. I accepted her words with a slow, deliberate nod. Consider it done, Brenda, I said, dropping the title of mother permanently. If you want to pretend you only have one daughter, that is entirely your choice. But if you think you are going to stand here and dictate terms to me after what you just did, you are completely out of your mind. Brenda stood incredibly tall, crossing her arms over her chest, as if she still possessed some invisible authority. I want you to go upstairs, pack your bags, and get out of this house immediately, she demanded, her voice sharp and uncompromising. Your sister just lost her husband to the federal prison system. Her entire life has been turned upside down. She needs a safe space to grieve this absolute tragedy in peace. We do not need your toxic energy polluting this environment any longer. You are no longer welcome under Trent and Jada's roof. I actually laughed out loud. The sound was harsh and bitter, echoing through the foyer and causing Jada to flinch on the floor. The physical pain in my abdomen flared up sharply from the sudden movement, but the pure adrenaline coursing through my veins completely masked it. Under Trent and Jada's roof, I repeated, shaking my head in sheer disbelief at her unwavering delusion. Brenda, you really need to start paying closer attention to the world around you. I reached into my leather purse for the absolute final time tonight. My fingers bypassed my wallet and pulled out a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope. I slowly unclasped the metal seal and pulled out the original notarized property deed. I did not drop this document onto the table. I held it firmly in my hands, stepping over the shattered crystal vase until I was standing directly in front of my mother. Read it, I commanded, holding the thick parchment up to her face. Brenda scoffed, refusing to look at the paper. I do not care what kind of fake spreadsheet you have cooked up this time, Camille. I told you to leave. I said, read it! I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Brenda startled, her eyes reluctantly dropping to the bold black text at the top of the page. She squinted, reading the legal jargon. As her eyes scanned the property address and the registered owner information, all the aggressive color instantly drained from her face. Her jaw went completely slack. She looked like a woman who had just stepped off a cliff into thin air. That is impossible, Brenda whispered, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the paper, as if checking to see if it was an illusion. Trent bought this house. He put the down payment on it 5 years ago. He put a down payment on it and then he completely stopped paying the mortgage. I corrected her, my tone clinical and devastatingly precise. 3 years ago, while Trent was busy buying expensive tailored suits and leasing luxury cars to impress you and Jada, he let this property slip into a severe state of delinquency. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. He was exactly 2 weeks away from being evicted by the county sheriff. Jada stopped crying. She slowly lifted her head from her hands, her mascara smeared heavily down her cheeks. She looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. "What are you talking about?" Jada rasped, her voice completely hoarse. "Trent told me we refinanced. He told me he secured a better interest rate because his credit was so exceptional." "He lied to you, Jada," I said, looking down at my sister on the hardwood floor. "He lied to you about absolutely everything. He did not refinance. He sold the house to an anonymous corporate entity to avoid bankruptcy. And I am the sole proprietor of that corporate entity." I turned my attention back to Brenda, making sure she absorbed every single syllable. "I bought this house through an LLC 3 years ago. I paid off the entire remaining mortgage in cash. I did it because I knew if the bank threw Trent out, he would drag Jada down into poverty with him, and I actually cared enough about my sister back then to prevent her from becoming homeless." The absolute silence in the foyer was deafening. The grand illusion of Trent's success, the very foundation of their arrogance, was entirely eradicated. He did not own the walls around them. He did not own the roof above their heads. For the last 3 years, the two of you have been strutting around this property acting like royalty. I continued, pacing slowly across my own floorboards. You hosted lavish parties. You treated me like a pathetic guest who should be grateful for a seat at the table. But the reality is, you have been living here as my non-paying tenants. I subsidized your entire existence. I let Trent pretend he was the master of this domain because his fragile ego could not handle the truth. But now that Trent is currently sitting in the back of a federal police cruiser, the charity officially ends. Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked frantically around the grand foyer, staring at the high ceilings, the custom staircase, and the expensive fixtures. She was finally realizing that the daughter she had just formally disowned was the literal owner of the castle. She had completely bet on the wrong horse, and she had just thrown away her only lifeline. But the conservatorship, Brenda stammered weakly, clinging desperately to her last shred of stolen power. "I control your assets. I can legally take this house from you." Julian stepped forward, completely destroying her final glimmer of hope. That emergency conservatorship was granted based on fraudulent medical claims and perjury, Julian stated with absolute legal authority. "My corporate attorneys have already been dispatched to the courthouse. The order will be entirely vacated by tomorrow morning, and you will be facing severe civil and criminal penalties for filing it. You have absolutely no legal standing here." I looked at the two women who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. They were sitting in the ruins of their own greed, completely stripped of their wealth, their pride, and their family. I felt a profound sense of closure. "Your lease expired at midnight," I stated coldly. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags before I have you cited for criminal trespassing." The 60-minute timer started the exact second the words left my mouth. For a fleeting moment, Brenda tried to hold my gaze silently, hoping I would blink or show a sudden flash of maternal guilt. But there was absolutely nothing left inside me to give her. I stood perfectly still, my posture completely rigid, projecting an unwavering wall of ice. Jada broke first. The sheer terror of being arrested for criminal trespassing completely overpowered her pride. She let out a panicked, breathless sob and scrambled to her feet. She did not bother to pick up the $50,000 diamond watch she had abandoned on the floor. She kicked off her uncomfortable designer heels and sprinted barefoot up the grand staircase. Brenda watched her golden child flee in absolute terror. The matriarchal composure she had weaponized for decades shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She let out a frustrated growl, grabbed the skirts of her expensive dress, and hurried up the stairs right behind Jada. Julian and I remained in the foyer. The pristine, elegant silence of my home was violently replaced by the chaotic, undignified sounds of two women realizing they were suddenly homeless and entirely broke. Heavy footsteps pounded against the ceiling above us. I heard doors being slammed with enough force to rattle the expensive picture frames on the walls. The harsh metallic scraping of wooden hangers being aggressively yanked across closet rods echoed down the staircase. Then the screaming started. The illusion of their unbreakable mother and daughter bond completely disintegrated the second their financial security was ripped away. I heard Jada shriek from the master bedroom, furiously accusing Brenda of trying to steal her limited edition Chanel handbag. Brenda shouted back at the top of her lungs, demanding Jada hand over her expensive jewelry because Brenda was going to need to pawn it to hire a criminal defense attorney for her perjury charges. They were turning on each other like starved animals. Jada screamed that Brenda should have known Trent was a fraud because Brenda was supposed to be the smart one. Brenda screamed right back that Jada was far too stupid and greedy to ever question where the money was coming from as long as she got to go shopping. They were viciously tearing each other apart over material possessions while the ashes of their entire fake empire fell around them. They quickly realized they had a massive logistical problem. They did not possess enough luxury luggage to hold years of hoarded expensive clothing. I had already anticipated this. Earlier that morning, before I even left for the hospital, I had securely locked all of my own suitcases inside my office safe. Desperate and running out of time, I heard Jada sprint down the back staircase into the kitchen. She began violently tearing through the pantry cabinets. She emerged a moment later, her arms full of heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags. The absolute indignity of packing their high-end couture into trash bags was a poetic justice I could have never scripted better myself. 30 minutes later, the grand exodus officially began. Jada appeared at the top of the staircase. Her perfect silk dress was wrinkled and stained with sweat. Her meticulously styled hair was a frizzy, chaotic mess. She was dragging two massive, overstuffed black garbage bags behind her. The heavy plastic thudded awkwardly and loudly against each wooden step as she descended. Brenda followed closely behind her. My mother looked entirely unhinged. Her arms were overflowing with loose designer shoes, tangled silk scarves, and expensive makeup palettes that she could not fit into the bags. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed with physical exertion and absolute humiliation. They reached the bottom of the stairs and had to navigate the disaster zone in the foyer. They tried to step carefully around the shattered crystal from the broken vase, but the heavy garbage bags dragged directly over the sharp shards. The thick plastic snagged and ripped open. A pile of expensive cashmere sweaters and silk blouses spilled out directly onto the dusty floorboards. Jada let out a loud, frustrated scream. She dropped to her knees, frantically shoving the ruined designer clothes back into the torn plastic bag. She looked absolutely pathetic, crawling on the floor of a house she used to rule, desperately clinging to fabric because it was the only thing of value she had left. I did not offer to help. Julian simply stepped aside to give them a clear path to the front door. "Keep moving," I instructed coldly, checking the clock on my phone. "You have 15 minutes left." Brenda glared at me with pure, unfiltered hatred, but she did not dare speak. She kicked the front door open and marched out into the humid Atlanta night. Jada dragged her torn garbage bags over the threshold, the plastic scraping loudly against the concrete porch. I walked out the front door right behind them, leaning against the thick white columns of my porch to watch the final spectacle unfold. The bright, unforgiving glare of the neighborhood streetlights completely exposed them. The heavy police presence from earlier had already drawn the attention of the entire affluent neighborhood. My wealthy neighbors were standing on their porches and manicured lawns, holding glasses of wine, openly staring at the two women dragging black trash bags across my grass. The absolute devastating social humiliation that Brenda had constantly feared and weaponized against me was now entirely hers to bear. Everyone in the community was watching her downfall in real time. Jada dropped her bags on the edge of the curb and pulled out her cell phone. Her hands were shaking violently as she frantically swiped through her contacts, desperately trying to find a friend who would take them in for the night. But the news of Trent's massive federal arrest had already spread like wildfire through their shallow gossip-obsessed social circles. Every single phone call she made went straight to voicemail. They were completely isolated. They were standing on the sidewalk under the harsh streetlights, surrounded by piles of plastic garbage bags, with absolutely nowhere to go. The glamorous facade was completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the ugly, undeniable truth of exactly who they were. I watched from the porch as Jada frantically dialed number after number, her thumbs flying across her cracked phone screen. She was pacing the edge of the curb, completely ignoring the fact that the expensive silk of her dress was dragging through the damp grass. I could hear her desperate pleading voice carrying through the quiet night air, begging women she had once considered her closest friends to send an Uber or wire her enough cash for a hotel room. But the affluent women in Jada's social circle did not tolerate scandal. The moment they realized Trent had been arrested by federal agents, Jada became a complete social pariah. Every single call was abruptly disconnected. Every text message was left unread. Jada finally let out a frustrated scream and hurled her phone directly into the pile of black garbage bags. She collapsed onto the curb, burying her face in her knees, crying with the intense, unbridled panic of a woman who had never actually had to survive a single day in the real world. My mother stood a few feet away from her, watching the entire meltdown unfold. I could see the exact moment the harsh reality of their situation finally penetrated Brenda's thick layer of denial. She looked down at Jada, her golden child, the daughter she had worshipped and protected her entire life. But Brenda did not see a daughter in need of comfort. She saw a massive, insurmountable burden. She realized that Jada had absolutely no money, no survival skills, and no plan. Jada could not save them. The glorious, wealthy future Brenda had banked on by siding with Trent was completely gone. Brenda slowly turned her head and looked back toward the house. Her eyes traced the manicured lawn, the bright exterior lighting, and the massive white columns of the front porch where I was standing. The house was warm, secure, and fully paid for, and suddenly the woman who had formally disowned me less than 20 minutes ago realized I was the only lifeline she had left. I watched as Brenda left Jada sitting on the curb. She turned her back on her favorite daughter and began the long, humiliating walk up my concrete driveway. Her expensive leather shoes scuffed against the pavement. Her shoulders, which were usually pulled back with absolute arrogance, were heavily slumped. The regal, untouchable matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, aging woman who had nowhere to sleep. She reached the bottom of the porch steps and stopped. She did not dare climb the stairs to stand on the same level as me. She looked up the harsh porch light, casting deep shadows across her face, exposing every single line and wrinkle. Camille Brenda began, her voice trembling. It was not the angry, demanding tone she had used inside the foyer. It was a soft, fragile whisper. It was the exact tone she used to use when I was a little girl, right before she was about to ask me to hand over my birthday money so she could buy something for Jada. It was a calculated, weaponized vulnerability. I did not respond. I simply looked down at her, my arms crossed carefully over my wounded abdomen. Julian remained standing quietly in the doorway behind me, a silent, imposing guardian, ensuring I was not physically threatened. Brenda took a deep, shuddering breath and forced a single tear to spill over her eyelashes. It rolled slowly down her cheek, ruining her expensive foundation. "Sweetheart, please listen to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I am in shock. We are all in shock. The things I said inside, I did not mean them. I was just so terrified and confused by everything happening with Trent. He manipulated us, Camille. He manipulated both of us. She actually tried to lump us together as if we were mutual victims. She was completely erasing the fact that she had gone to a judge that morning to steal my legal autonomy. You need to understand the pressure I have been under." Brenda continued, taking one cautious step up the wooden stairs. "I am your mother. I am getting older. My blood pressure cannot handle this kind of stress. I have absolutely nowhere to go tonight. My bank accounts are frozen because of the joint filings. I do not have a car. I do not have a hotel reservation. She paused, lifting her hands in a gesture of complete surrender. You do not have to forgive me tonight. I am not asking you to forget what happened. I just need a place to rest my head. Just let me sleep in the guest room. I will stay completely out of your way. We can talk about everything tomorrow when the sun comes up and we have clear heads. Please, Camille. I am your mother. You cannot just leave me out on the street like a stray dog. I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the absolute depths of her selfishness. She was standing there crying fake tears, begging for a warm bed in my guest room. But she had not mentioned Jada a single time. What about your golden child? I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. Are you asking for a room for Jada too? Brenda swallowed hard. She glanced nervously over her shoulder at Jada, who was still sobbing hysterically on the curb, completely oblivious to her mother's betrayal. Brenda quickly turned back to me, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Jada is out of control right now, Brenda said, her tone dripping with sudden resentment toward the daughter she had always favored. She is hysterical. She is going to be screaming all night, and I simply cannot deal with her emotional baggage. She made her bed with that criminal husband of hers. Let her sit out there and figure it out. Just let me inside, Camille. Just me. I am your mother. I gave you life. You owe me at least a safe place to sleep. The absolute moral bankruptcy of her request hit me like a physical blow. For 35 years, I had believed that Brenda's mistreatment of me was born out of a genuine, albeit twisted, love for Jada. I thought she sacrificed me because she simply loved my sister more. But standing on the porch tonight, listening to her beg for a comfortable bed while actively offering to abandon Jada on the curb, I realized the terrifying truth. Brenda did not love Jada. Brenda did not love anyone. She only loved herself. She was a parasite who attached herself to whoever possessed the most resources at any given time. Trent's resources had dried up, so she was immediately trying to detach from Jada and latch back onto me. She would literally step over her own crying daughter to secure a warm room for herself. The realization washed away any lingering trace of guilt I might have felt about kicking her out. The heavy, complicated knot of childhood trauma in my chest suddenly untangled itself. I saw her exactly for what she was, and the illusion was permanently broken. You gave me life. I repeated, testing the weight of the phrase she had weaponized against me for decades. You carried me for 9 months, and you spent the next 35 years making me wish I had never been born. Brenda flinched as if I had slapped her across the face. Camille, do not say that, she whimpered, taking another step up the stairs. I did my best. I raised you to be a strong, successful woman. You did not raise me to be strong, I corrected her, my voice rising with absolute, undeniable clarity. I had to become strong to survive you. Every single ounce of success I have achieved in this world was built in spite of you, not because of you. I uncrossed my arms and took a step forward, bringing myself right to the edge of the top stair. I looked directly down into her terrified eyes. Do you want to know what a real mother does? I asked, the raw emotion finally bleeding into my tone. A real mother does not demand that her daughter cook a gourmet meal less than 48 hours after having an organ removed from her body. A real mother does not look at her child's bleeding surgical wounds and call them a dramatic stunt. A real mother does not walk into a courthouse and commit perjury to steal her daughter's hard-earned money just to pay off a white criminal's credit card debt. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but she had absolutely no defense. The undeniable facts of her abuse were laid out on the porch between us. Mothers protect their daughters, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. They do not sell them out. You sold me out today, Brenda. You thought I was weak because I was in a hospital bed, and you tried to financially execute me while I was under anesthesia. You made your choice. You chose Trent. You chose Jada. You chose the illusion of wealth over your own flesh and blood. And now you get to live with the exact consequences of that choice. But I have nowhere to go, Brenda cried out, her voice cracking as genuine panic finally set in. You cannot do this to me. I will freeze out here. You can sleep on the pile of designer clothes you tried to steal from my foyer, I replied coldly. Or you can call the police and ask them if they have a vacant cell next to your son-in-law. But you are never stepping foot inside my house ever again. I turned around, completely turning my back on the woman who had tormented me my entire life. I walked back toward the open front door. Julian stepped inside first, giving me the space I needed to finish the transaction. "Camille, wait!" Brenda screamed from the bottom of the stairs, her footsteps pounding heavily against the wood as she desperately tried to run up onto the porch. "Camille, please! I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will do whatever you want. I will go to the courthouse tomorrow and reverse the paperwork. Please do not lock me out." I stepped over the threshold into my beautiful, quiet foyer. I placed my hand firmly on the heavy brass handle of the solid oak door. I looked at Brenda one last time. She had reached the top of the stairs, her face streaked with black mascara, her hands reaching out toward me, as if she could somehow physically stop the inevitable. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel sadness. I only felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute freedom. I pushed the heavy wooden door forward. It swung shut with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the sound of her frantic screaming. I reached up and firmly turned the deadbolt, the loud metallic click echoing through the silent house. It was not just a lock on a door. It was a permanent, unbreakable emotional boundary. The cord was finally cut. I was completely, unapologetically free. The heavy metallic click of the deadbolt echoed through the grand foyer, followed immediately by something I had not experienced in my own home for years. Absolute uninterrupted silence. There was no more screaming. There were no more unreasonable demands. The suffocating tension that had poisoned the very air inside my house was completely gone, sucked out into the humid Atlanta night, along with the people who created it. I stood with my hand resting on the brass door handle for a long moment, simply breathing in the quiet. Then, as if my body suddenly realized the war was finally over, the massive surge of adrenaline that had been keeping me standing abruptly crashed. A sharp, searing wave of agony radiated from my surgical incisions. My knees buckled slightly and I let out a sharp gasp, grabbing my abdomen as the physical toll of the last 48 hours violently caught up to me. Julian was there in an instant. He did not hover or act frantic. He moved with a calm, grounding presence. He gently took my arm, supporting my weight without making me feel weak or helpless. "Let us get you off your feet," Julian said softly, his deep voice a soothing contrast to the chaotic shrieking I had endured all evening. "You have fought enough battles for one night." I did not argue. I leaned into his supportive grip as he guided me away from the front door. We carefully stepped around the scattered debris of the shattered crystal vase and the blue conservatorship folder that my mother had abandoned on the floorboards. Julian led me out of the foyer and into the formal living room, helping me slowly lower myself onto the plush velvet sofa. He grabbed a thick woven throw blanket from the back of the armchair and carefully draped it over my legs. "Do you need your pain medication?" he asked, his dark eyes scanning my pale face with genuine professional and personal concern. "I can get you a glass of water." I shook my head slowly, leaning my head back against the soft cushions. "I am okay." I breathed out, closing my eyes for a brief second. For the first time in my entire life, I am actually completely okay. Julian sat down in the leather armchair across from the sofa. He rested his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together as he looked at me. He had just witnessed the absolute worst of my family. He had seen the raw, ugly truth of my upbringing. Yet when I opened my eyes and looked back at him, I did not see a single ounce of pity in his expression. I only saw profound, unwavering respect. "I have negotiated with ruthless corporate raiders." Camille Julian began, his tone serious and reflective. "I have sat in boardrooms with men who would sell their own souls for a fraction of a percentage point. But I have never in my life witnessed the level of sheer mental resilience and strategic brilliance that you displayed tonight. A small, tired smile touched the corners of my mouth. I had a lot of practice, I replied quietly. When you grow up as the designated scapegoat, you either learn how to anticipate every attack or you let them destroy you. I decided a long time ago that I was not going to let them destroy me. Julian nodded slowly, absorbing the heavy truth of my words. Well, they certainly underestimated exactly who they were dealing with, he said. And to be entirely honest, Vanguard Holdings has been underestimating you as well. I shifted slightly on the sofa, looking at him with mild confusion. You gave me executive clearance to run a massive federal investigation, Julian. I hardly think you underestimated me. I gave you a job that 10 senior auditors could not handle, and you executed it flawlessly while dealing with a major medical trauma and a highly toxic domestic situation, Julian corrected me. The regional office is going to need a complete restructuring from the ground up now that Trent and his network are being indicted. But I do not want you managing that cleanup. Your talents are entirely wasted on regional management. He leaned forward, holding my gaze with absolute corporate authority. I am officially offering you a seat on the executive board, Camille. I want you to step into the role of senior executive partner of Global Financial Security. You will report directly to me and only to me. You will have full autonomy, a substantial equity stake in Vanguard Holdings, and the power to completely rewrite our internal auditing protocols. I stared at him, the magnitude of his offer washing over me. This was not a fake manufactured promotion like the one we had dangled in front of Trent. This was the absolute pinnacle of my industry. It was a position of immense power and wealth offered to me by a billionaire who had just watched me systematically dismantle my own family to protect his empire. I am not offering you this out of gratitude, Julian added quickly, as if reading my mind. I am offering you this because you are the most formidable, uncompromising professional I have ever met. Vanguard needs your mind, Camille, and I need a partner I can trust implicitly. I looked around my quiet, beautiful living room. I thought about the years I spent shrinking myself to make Trent feel tall. I thought about the thousands of hours I worked just to hand my paychecks over to a mother who despised me and a sister who used me. I had spent my entire existence proving my worth to people who were completely committed to misunderstanding me. But sitting here tonight, bleeding but victorious, I realized my worth was never up for debate. I accept the partnership. Julian, I said, my voice steady and completely self-assured. A genuine bright smile broke across Julian's face. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Excellent, he said warmly. We will draft the official paperwork next week. For now, you are on strict medical leave. Do not even think about opening a spreadsheet until those bandages are off. He walked toward the entryway, stopping just before the broken glass. I can call a private cleaning service to come sweep this up, he offered, gesturing to the ruined foyer. No, I replied, pulling the throw blanket a little tighter around my shoulders. Leave it. I will sweep it up myself tomorrow morning. It is my house. I want to clear the wreckage on my own terms. Julian gave me one last respectful nod. He let himself out the front door, making sure the heavy deadbolt clicked securely into place before he walked down the driveway to his waiting car. I sat completely alone in my massive 4-bedroom Atlanta home. The silence was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was light, airy, and incredibly peaceful. I slowly stood up from the sofa, ignoring the dull ache in my side, and walked through my pristine kitchen. I poured myself a fresh glass of cold water and walked over to the large bay windows overlooking the front lawn. The street was entirely empty. The police cruisers were gone. Jada and Brenda were gone. The black garbage bags full of designer clothes had vanished into the night. For 35 years, I was conditioned to believe that family was the ultimate unbreakable bond. I was taught that blood required endless sacrifice, endless forgiveness, and endless financial support. Society tells us that cutting off our parents or siblings is a tragic failure, We are told to keep the peace to turn the other cheek and to accept abuse simply because the people hurting us happen to share our DNA. But as I stood in my kitchen, a wealthy, independent, and fiercely successful African American woman, I knew the absolute truth. Walking away from toxic blood ties is not a tragic loss. It is a profound, beautiful victory. I did not lose my family tonight. I evicted a group of parasites who had disguised themselves as a family. I reclaimed my narrative. I reclaimed my sanctuary. I reclaimed the millions of dollars I was destined to earn in my new executive partnership. And most importantly, I reclaimed my own physical and mental peace. My mother had told me I would be nothing without her approval. She told me I was unlovable. But the love I needed was never going to come from a woman who viewed me as an ATM. The love I needed had to come from myself. By locking that heavy wooden door, I finally proved that I loved myself enough to demand basic respect. I proved that my hard-earned wealth, my brilliant mind, and my generous heart belonged to me alone. I am Camille, and I am the absolute master of my own destiny. Have you ever had to evict toxic family members from your life? Share your story in the comments below.